The Third Side of the Coin, brought to you by Excalibur Coaching and Consulting.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast. This is our 15th episode. We wanted to dedicate this episode to the insights into humanity. My name is Alex Aberle, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Tim Wong. I'm the president of Excalibur Coaching and Consulting, and my co-host, Tim Wong, is the International Faculty for the Art of Living Foundation. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I am doing fantastic as always. Tim, if you think about it, the space that both, even independently, you and I are in, and what we're talking about in each of the episodes of podcasts is all about well-being, creating the atmosphere where the individuals can thrive through personal evolution, through mindfulness. We've taught so many techniques over the period of the last 9 months that I think it's just going to be amazing to see the long-term impact because those videos are going to hopefully stay on the World Wide Web for a while, and hopefully somebody will get use out of them.
So today we're doing a recap episode, aren't we?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And you reminded me that it's been 9 months since we started, and it's been one hell of a ride for us. The things that we hold very closely to ourselves on the way we engage with the world and how we function and perform, just by talking about it, it's sort of, I've grown from it and I've gone a lot deeper into those understandings as well. How about you?
It's definitely been an amazing ride, because if I were to look back 9 months ago, I think I was a completely different person, where I thought I knew quite a bit. And I'm at the point where I know yet again that I don't know anything. I think I'm coming more and more to that realization that there's so much to learn. And in our discussions, as you and I were exploring the humanity itself and the humility that comes with it, the points where we discussed how to become better leaders, how the businesses could survive, how people can go through different career transitions and paths, and everything combined really is giving me a better opportunity to understand that I'm the small part of a bigger universe, of bigger problems and challenges that people are dealing with, including the leaders who have official titles and unofficial titles.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you know, the interesting thing now, when we're thinking back on this, 9 months ago, it was just at the height of the panic of the pandemic. So when was that? That was like March, April,
March.
about May, March, April,
March.
May, around then, yeah, March. So I think what drove us to start recording some of our thoughts and sharings between you and me for everyone to be able to access is, I think it were two things. One was there was a global reset. And then after the reset, how the heck do you reboot yourself again or reboot things around us? This is our 15th episode on what is it that we need to look for as we're resetting our lives. And then how do we reboot it so that we start doing things that we really want to do or really believe in?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, isn't it? Because I think the kickstart to the reset was exactly the beginning of the pandemic, when people did not realize that it was going to be a long-term impacting, life-changing situation for everybody in the world. And how often does it happen? We had global pandemics in the past, but this right here, when you look at the big impact on our mental health, everything that had to change. And I think the truths that we've spoken before in March and then going forward really did not change. There's certain universal truths that stay the same. So I hope that our quick recap here of some of those universal truths are going to remind each and every one of you, our viewers, of how important it is to concentrate on introspection, mindfulness, meditation, thinking of the impact for the better of humanity and becoming a person who can truly make a difference in the world.
When we start looking at this, when we talk about reset and reboot, they kind of intersect and overlap each other. So when we're looking at reset, it's sort of rethinking your life, resetting your life goals. And then with that, how do you improve your community around you? And that community is in its very broad sense of the groups that you might be in it, or just the community that you live in or society you live in. And equally, once you're resetting your those three categories, within the same three categories, you start to think about rebooting. And that's how do you flourish. And very much like what you just pointed out, Alex, flourishing is about, and well-being is very hard to define because you can't define it with wide generalization. It's just so difficult. And the easiest access point, I think, and what we've talked about is that through the mind, and that's where mindfulness and some of the topics we talked about was about fear. We talked about curiosity a lot, and these are all a spectrum of the same thing. So when you're fearful, you're not curious. In fact, you would rather not be curious. And when you're curious, you're not fearful. And we sort of explored that spectrum through the workplace and through our own presence of mind as we encounter things that the whole world is encountering in a new way as well.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and take a ride down the memory lane and take a look at the main points that we've discussed in our past episodes. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast. Our first episode is on the topic of COVID-19 and the aftermath of workforce reductions. My name is Alex Aberle, and I am joined by my dear friend and colleague, Timothy Wong. The unemployment in April jumped to 14.7%. There's 36.5 million people unemployed.
I think the unemployment you're seeing right now, everyone has talked about it for some time, but it didn't escalate so quickly simply because we didn't expect a massive disruption in transportation. The entire economy, regardless of where you live, has been driven with the opportunity to travel or to go somewhere. And now that it's under lockdown in most parts of the world, then everything else, it short circuits the entire supply chain. I think what's been very interesting, how different governments are approaching it. So the Western governments, meaning, like US, United Kingdom and Australia, you have what's known as government assistance. It does help in some way to decrease the impact that one might have from becoming unemployed. But if you start looking at Hong Kong, it's totally a free market, and really any government subsidies, if at all, doesn't really help. So, for example, there's a stigma with people who have recovered from the COVID-19 virus in Hong Kong, and either they're fired from work because there's no legal protection for that, and also inability to find work because of the situation right now. So there's calls now from these survivors for the government to at least give them a subsidy to allow them to live, but that's not happening as well. How people are attuning to it gives us a good idea of what is happening in people's minds, of how they take responsibility, if you could say that, for their own experience.
In the beginning of this pandemic situation, I was listening to a podcast with Peter Robinson. He had Kevin Warsh. He's the former Fed. And he actually mentioned that the government subsidies that were given out as part of the assistance to those who lost jobs would prevent people wanting to rejoin the workforce. So there's definitely a different side of things. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah, it's interesting how you raised that. That's so abuse of the system, and that's something that the government in Australia just recently came out saying that the subsidies matching your income that's lost can't go on forever, because what you're doing is you're asking for the next and next and next generations to pay it back. Someone needs to pay it back. I think the more important thing coming out of this is it's always good to have support, right? Because it gives you a buffer. But the question now is, what do you do with that support in order to get yourself up and standing again, rather than using it as a crutch? We've been talking about this for a while. You have the victim mentality and the culprit mentality. When you're let go, you feel like you've been victimized. And then when you stay behind, you feel like, oh, am I a culprit of part of this entire reorganization that's happening around me?
Yeah. Yeah, those are valid points, absolutely. And I don't know whether we as a human race, a society, truly are addressing it. Because regardless of the political view, my personal concern, just like you've mentioned earlier, is the overall impact on human race and its well-being, right? So the society cannot really exist unless it's making products or services that's necessary for our survival. So if we don't work, the overall impact could be just devastating, right?
I think it's interesting you said that, saying that we need product to allow us to survive. Or is it products to make us lazy, more convenient, or for us to stop thinking? So a lot of the convenience that we're seeing now, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because it's meant to give us more time to do things that we like to do. But at the same time, what I've noticed is that we give up our curiosity to learn things, and that's the important thing about how we advance, whether you were part of the cut from work or you remain in work, we all sort of withdraw into a space where curiosity might not be as in the forefront as we would like, but that's what makes us human, because that curiosity on the positive side is allowing us to reach our full potential.
Tying it into the mental health, right? Or the ability to be in the growth mode. It's driven by so much fear, or perhaps the attachment to the convenience, because we've always had it, so we're never going to lose it mentality. And the fear that's being communicated to the entire society. I don't think it quite matters which country you live in. That's what kind of ties a lot of people together. The fear-driven actions that really limits the curiosity. And some of the numbers that are being predicted by the expert, in addition to the COVID-related deaths, there could be about 70,000 more or whatever added to or attributed to the deaths based on mental illness, whether it's suicide and everything else. How would that help if somebody stays curious, being limited with the possibilities of travel and everything else you're mentioning?
As you grow older, you start asking questions, and that's, the curiosity of when you first ask, why is the sun hot? Why is the sun warm? Why is water wet? These sometimes don't have answers to it. I mean, you can give a scientific answer to it, but there's something greater behind that, of the why, of that curiosity. And that eventually leads you to seeking answers within yourself. I think what we haven't talked about enough in the world is, what is failure? How do we deal with failure? And everything that we look around us is driven by the fear of failure, because of that competitiveness. Now, what is that competitiveness that we're talking about? It's the fear of missing out. What is the fear of missing out? Oh, I don't know, and we keep going and pursuing whatever it is that we want to pursue. There's nothing wrong with that, without ever looking back until something happens.
Let's talk a little bit about those who got laid off. When it happens, it becomes quite a traumatic experience.
If you put it into stages roughly, when you're laid off, first is that of betrayal because you feel that you've contributed or you're part of something bigger. And then when you're asked to leave, regardless of how long or short your tenure with, you committed yourself in good faith. So it's breaking of trust. And then your mind starts to get confused and clouded, and then anger comes up. The anger is where you feel that you were not recognized for the contribution that you were making, or that they didn't see your full potential. Instead of allowing you to fume and dig yourself deeper into anger and betrayal and turn that into a positive and start building on it. Then after betrayal comes fear because, depending on how disciplined you are in saving or for a rainy day, it's a question of livelihood. From that of fear, it comes down to doubt and sadness. And that doubt and sadness is, am I good enough? Maybe really I wasn't that good, or will I be able to find another job in this situation or something that pays equally to that? So a sense of doubt, a sense of validity, and a sense of value goes out the window. And that is a point where you need people to support you. You can't think yourself through it. Because as you try to think yourself through it, it just keeps going round in circles. Obviously, like, with Excalibur, your organization, you help people process it because you speak to them and then also allow them to write things down. So methodology in journaling, in speaking to other people that is outside of the situation can give you clarity. That's what they mean by soundboarding people.
And what I'm finding from some of my clients, that the initial reaction after clearly betrayal and all the stages that you mentioned, when people start thinking, well, I have no idea, I'm stuck, where do I go next? It's embarrassment. People feel the sense of embarrassment, which is false.
So once you recognize what the nature of stress is one, it's a repetitive thought, or if you don't want to call it a repetitive thought, it's your attachment or your obsessiveness with that singular event, not being able to let go of it. And usually you're not able to let go of it because you feel that either you've been devalued or valued by it. But if you keep holding on to that, you'll never progress. Misery is when you don't take responsibility for your actions and you start blaming. What is it as me, as a person, that I should improve on? And that's where change in character happens.
One of my teachers, when I was learning about the cognition, the psychology of things, he kept saying the same thing over and over again. The sign of the mature character is being able to take responsibility for your thoughts and actions. That's just it. And what I'm seeing a lot of times, people who eventually break through and go on to do just fascinating and amazing things. And those are the people who come to me and ready to actually create a change. So what is that saying? That the desire to change has to be greater than the desire to stay the same?
The person needs to be ready for change. You cannot force it to. The breath is the only thing that we can influence that happens only in the present moment. We cannot breathe for the past, nor can we breathe for the future. It happens in the present. So by focusing on the breath, you bring your mind into the present. It's a very practical way, and it is only in the present, now, this moment, nothing is happening. That is the present moment. It's clear. And that's where creativity happens. And for our friends out there, it's, meditation or any types of exercise or programs, whatever, it's a discipline. So you need to put time in for it to grow. It doesn't, It doesn't happen like that. It might happen as just a spike in your feelings, but then the problem with that is that you're forever chasing that feeling. And if you're forever chasing that feeling, what happens? You're not going to get into meditation. So, these are just small little tips that you need to find a teacher. And I'm not saying come to me, but you need to find a teacher to take you through meditation because they have experience. It's like coming to Alex to get executive coaching. It's not that you can't do it yourself, but the fact that there is a specialist there that has been through it or has seen enough to be able to give you advice or direction, that's what makes it different. So creativity equally needs someone to guide.
Look, I agree with you that finding the teacher who is the master of knowing how to potentially ask the right questions or potentially give you the right advice in the moment that you need. And you were that teacher to me when it came to really learning how to breathe again, which is absolutely fascinating how much we're neglecting this simple fact. We're forgetting that we are connected beyond just our bodies. So, but let's just move towards a different technique that we can use after you activated the creative process through breathing. You talked about mind agility in our previous episode, and I believe that before we get to improving our mind agility and become more creative, we need to become more self-aware and recognize that our core beliefs are the most fundamental level of belief. They're global, they're rigid, and they're overgeneralized. A lot of times our thinking is overgeneralized. We think in black and white. We think that everybody is after us, or we think I need to be perfect to be successful, which the reality is it's not the truth. And automatic thoughts, the actual thoughts that and images that go through a person's mind on a daily basis are situation specific. And we need to recognize that. And it's really the most superficial level of cognition or thinking. Core beliefs really influence our attitudes, rules, and assumptions. And our minds are meaning-making machines. And unless we pause and actually listen to ourselves, simply put, from the inside, so starting to breathe, starting to pay attention how our body reacts, we're continuing to react based on those core beliefs and those automatic thoughts that sometimes are simply going to fail us in shifting our meaning to the new ideas and possibilities. So just because somebody believes in something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And the second point is changing your thinking so it is more reality-based and useful can help you and me feel better and progress towards creating a more fulfilling life. Can we also maybe try something? Because after doing the meditation or breathing exercise, if somebody's mind does not accept meditation, and there's still a thought that's circling in your mind, sometimes they're just so persuasive, trying to convince us that we need to be anxious and worry. Just think about one of those thoughts. You don't have to tell me what they are. Just acknowledge that, yes, I'm thinking of that circling thought that's bothering me, potentially not leaving me. You got it?
Yep.
Okay. So one way to do that, and this is a cognitive behavior therapy, which is quite a simplified way of putting it. One of the techniques that I use with a lot of my clients, and actually it helped me, is called thought policing. So one of the ways you can do it is to identify that specific thought and then put it to the test, asking specific questions. So let me ask you a few questions and respond to me, just keeping in mind that thought, okay? So right now that thought is swirling through your mind. It's not leaving you alone. It's creating stress and anxiety. So, Tim, what is the evidence for this thought?
My goodness. Not my goodness, but it's like none.
Okay.
Yeah, what's interesting is it brings the clarity of you're mixing up the consequences. I can't explain that. It's there's no direct cause, but you're inferring from other things that is the cause. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as long as it makes sense to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after you established, like you said, and of course you can take longer than that, to think through and talk it through. It's always best to talk it with somebody, but you certainly can do it on your own. Then ask yourself, what is the evidence against it?
A lot.
Right. And again, we're trying not to get into the confidential point of your mind and this thought, but question that, because it brings, and we're talking about the third side of the coin. There's always another side to the truth, to the evidence and such. Another type of question that you can follow up, if you can't necessarily determine that evidence, you can ask yourself, is this thought based on facts or on feelings? Then you can go and dive in even a bit deeper, and you can ask, is this thought black and white when reality is more complicated? And I think you actually started addressing that, Tim, right? When you said, there's more to it.
Yes. It's that's a very neat process.
It actually challenges you to start looking at it from a different perspective. You can ask yourself, could I be misinterpreting the evidence, or am I making any assumptions? Another way to shift, because sometimes when you start with questioning the facts and the evidence for a certain thought that is creating a lot of anxiety, is, just take another person's perspective too. Might other people have different interpretations of the same situation, and what are they? Because you want to become your best friend. So what would you tell your best friend if they had that same thought? So you want to, in a way, bring other people into that thinking process if it's really stressing you out so much. And there are many other questions that you can do, and I'll actually post those. They're called Socratic questions, and they're really opening up your view on how you can challenge your beliefs, those core beliefs, because some of those beliefs from the time you were 7 years old are no longer true.
Yes.
And I think it takes commitment, just like with our breathing exercises. It's commitment, because having a couple of good techniques that you've learned about and not doing anything about it, to whether it's reduce stress and then unleash creativity or come up with some innovative ideas, it's really going to be of no good use, right?
That's correct. Yeah, creativity is the antithesis or the opposite of fear. So when you have fear, and you talked about fear at the beginning of part 1, the fear will prevent you from becoming creative. And your Socratic questioning allows you to strip away or peel away the perceived fear.
Thank you so much for coming back and listening to us. Welcome to the third side of the coin, episode 3, Fear Inhibits Your Potential. Tim, what I wanted to do is to kind of kick us off with reminding our viewers that in the second episode, we spoke about unleashing creativity when dealing with difficult predicaments presented to the professionals in the time of pandemic, such as COVID-19 and in general. And we pointed out that it was impossible for a human brain to think creatively or solve problems when operating out of our reptilian part of the brain, or when amygdala is activated. And this process ultimately is the same when we're afraid. So when we need to create a solution or learn how to move forward and get unstuck out of fear, we need to figure out a way how to switch our living process from amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. So the question that I have for you, Tim, is how do you typically address fear?
I usually address fear by doing breathing techniques. Fear is the agitation of the mind. Obviously, if there's a lion or a hungry tiger in front of you, don't close your eyes and breathe in and breathe out, you run. But sometimes when you're at the office or in front of your screen, or something's happening where there is an opportunity to just stop, to pause, then it's quite easy just to do that. A couple of breaths with your eyes closed. Don't worry, the world is not going to go away, and it can wait 30 seconds, maybe up to 60 seconds for you, and then resume your work that you have to do. Obviously, don't do this when you're driving as well, but these then allow you to pause. And you see a lot of meditative or mindfulness or all these terminology coming in is really just telling you to pause. We forget to pause, and it's just pausing occasionally, and it's a discipline, and that allows you to reset and allow you to pivot again in order to, like, okay, now what do I do? Rather than what do I do? Because then you are firefighting rather than stepping back and then looking at the fire and then say, okay, that is the exit.
When it comes to living a fruitfully effective life, the only real problem that people will ever face is an emotional response to something that either has or hasn't happened yet. And fear, some say false evidence appearing real. I'm not saying that some fear is not real, but in some cases, in a lot of cases, it's perceived. So fear is an emotional response. If you think about it, there are countless people all around the world who live in a happy marriage, have money in the bank, a good job, or perhaps successful or sustainable business, but yet still exist in a constant state of fear, anger, anxiety, or stress. And most people spend their whole life focusing on what they don't have or what they can lose rather than on what they have now. If you are guilty of this, worrying about what you don't have rather than appreciating the things that you do, you stand at risk of living a highly stressed life in basically being in a constant mode of striving, busyness, or stress, just like a pressure cooker that's waiting to explode. And I can definitely recommend that when you are faced with fear and recognize that you are afraid, you pause and use the method that Tim brought to our attention in the second episode, as well as today. A lot of work cannot actually begin until we start breathing, because when you're afraid, you depend on the emotions. It's the emotion factor, right? So reaction to a certain outside situation. So let's say the news of this virus came, and then the first reaction is fear, whether it's fear of the unknown or any other reasons that our friends and viewers actually referred to. So the first step is to really understand that when you are afraid, you cannot think creatively. And a lot of times when we are stuck in the state of fear, we are developing this chronic stress, almost disorder in some cases. That's when you start seeing anxiety or depression cases. Well, acute stress is good. So it happens momentarily and then you're able to control it. Because during the first reaction, your adrenaline is rushing. It's either, fear or excitement, or, cortisol is coming up so you can run away or maybe avoid the situation, or perhaps have other feelings. But then if you want to proceed and actually come up with some type of solution, you can do one of the exercises. Again, after you pause, you breathe, or acknowledge that there's a potential that what you're doing is afraid of something that might never happen. One of the techniques that you can use to work on yourself or work yourself out of this response is called the head, heart, and gut technique. Pay attention first to your head. So maybe forehead area. Your head generally thinks about a decision, goal, or situation in a logical manner. And we use our heads to weigh up pros and cons and evaluate them. What is your head telling you about this decision to move forward, or perhaps the goal that you're thinking, or maybe the situation that you're afraid of? The next step is your heart. So shift your focus on your heart. And our hearts consider decisions, goals, or situations based on our emotions, the feelings. The heart is generally passionate or could be irrational. But still, it's a part of you. Take a few minutes and focus your attention on your heart. What is your heart telling you about the decision to move forward, or the goal you're setting, or the situation? Next, shift your attention to your gut. And our gut is where our intuition lives, or at least that's what they say. And we have all experiences that feeling in our guts when something just doesn't feel right. The gut doesn't offer much explanation. Still, take a few minutes to focus your attention on your stomach area or on your gut. What is your gut telling you about all this? And then after you've done that, again, all it is just paying attention to different parts of you. It's all a part of you. Then if you are into journaling, it's fine. I understand some people do not like that, but ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, having experienced what your head, heart, and gut are telling you, what decision can you now make? And then ask yourself, what's the first action step you must take? It's all about taking the responsibility.
Yeah, no, I really like your technique, because it's a great way for leadership introspection, which is so important to be successful. Successful leaders need to reflect, need to introspect, and that, not saying that introspection is about fear, but just about it's the way we might want to journal. Instead of writing down, we introspect. That going from the head to the heart to the gut is a very complete sequencing that's pretty neat. Thank you for sharing that, Harry. Yeah, can you imagine the last time we connected, so much has happened across the world. It's like a domino effect.
Yeah, unbelievable. We were just talking, 4 weeks ago about COVID-19 and the aftermath of workforce reductions. And here we are. Maybe workforce reductions are improving, but ultimately it all comes down how the leaders are reacting to it all. Today, we wanted to talk about leadership and bringing people along. And I just want to open up with this quote from a Canadian author, Robin Sharma, who said, "Leadership is not about a title or designation. It's about impact, influence, and inspiration."
Bringing people along is really communication and framework. So in previous generations, bringing people along is the command and control approach. But now bringing people along is more about collaboration and inclusiveness. So it's a complete change from before it was a pyramid, command at the top and control. It's now inverted. So the individual becomes an empowering stakeholder or influencer in the team or position that they're in. So when the individual is empowered and you're looking at an entire organization, it becomes very important that we bring people along. And what does that mean? Does that mean, telling people what to do or influencing people what to do? I mean, it's a bit of both, depending on what you need to get done. But then the skill comes into it of, well, how do you bring people along?
I know I've been talking about human-centric leadership for ages, and even when I was a leader, I probably have taken different approaches from the typical command and control, perhaps because when I was a younger, I was a bit of a rebel and anti-authority, but I wanted to make sure that I've impacted the individual's well-being. And what I found is when I concentrated more on the human needs within the organization, they performed better.
At the workplace, we don't see the individual. We don't see the human. We only really see as a person who is delivering or performing a task. But in anything about humans, or if you see a human before you, you immediately want to connect with them, talk to them, engage with them, whether you're introvert or extrovert. But when you come into the workplace, especially in a place where we congregate, do we see the human, or do we just see a means to getting things done? Not too many people address this. I mean, we do hear people say, well, see the human first, but when you have to get things done, there needs to be a certain responsibility and accountability into it. And then obviously then it leads into command and control. But responsibility and accountability can be self-driven if you are clear and you empower the individual and make sure that the individual knows how critical their role is within the grand scheme of things. We do not appreciate the bigger picture or the grand scheme of things, so we feel disconnected. It's pretty much like, you're aware that you're in your own home. Are you aware that you're part of a neighborhood? Then are you aware that you're part of a suburb? Then are you aware that you're part of a city, a part of a state, part of a country, and then part of the world, part of the galaxy, part of the universe? Are you aware that this universe was created just for you? This galaxy was created just for you. This solar system was created just for you. This Earth was created just for you. And this country was created just for you. This state, this city, this house, this room, this chair was all created for this moment at this present stage to happen so that you're aware of it. And that immediately, created that sense of gratitude and fulfillment and contentment of realizing, wow, we usually don't think that far. So when you're bringing people along, it's like, have you made them aware of really the things that goes around them and the things that they also contribute them? So when we're bringing people along, it's also making the individual value that it will not happen without them. We need to start seeing the value in others. We do see the values in other, but let's make it intentional. That is bringing people along.
Where does self-awareness, because I feel like it's an important point to start, for someone who is leading and influencing people within, no matter what size of organization, if they're moving them to accomplish some type of mission or goals within the company, they first need to become self-aware to understand their limitations and the potential for growth. And we have a lot of managers who probably have never been truly trained and developed in what that self-awareness truly mean on the bigger scale, and how important it is to truly continue working on the awareness and your belonging in the world, not just in the workplace, for people to truly start trusting you. So would you say that the first step to start working on improving yourself as a leader going to be enhancing or improving self-awareness?
If you don't know how to lead yourself, how can you lead others?
So to me, I think what's been missing in a lot of organizations, or at least with the leaders that I have been involved in the last 20 some years, and even being the leader myself, that perhaps I did not quite understand how my behaviors truly impacted the individuals. You remember we've talked about the amygdala, where you could not, when it's activated, you are either fighting or you are running away or avoiding something. Well, it's no different in the situation with the boss telling me that I needed to do something without truly connecting my skills or helping me understand what the end goal is. And when that same amygdala or limbic system, it also attaches emotional content to our memories, and memories that have strong emotional meaning tend to stick, and fearful memories are able to be formed only after a few repetitions. So if you work in the environment associated with ambiguity or fear, you are forming memories and habits that could be triggered automatically and create more chronic issues of stress and irrational responses. So I just suspect that if most leaders and managers knew that they play a part of forming these harmful, fearful memories in their employees, they would have used the more effective approaches to mobilize their teams into action and become more engaged.
Yes, I think I totally agree with you, Alex. And Alex, you've always been at the next level leadership. As a leader, how you show up, what is it that when you are there with other people, how are you supporting them? There's an easy way to understand what self-awareness is. When you're driving a car, are you aware that you're driving a car? When you're on the freeway and it's a traffic jam? Yes. So whether it's a positive, like you're enjoying your food, or whether it's a negative, you're on the freeway and there's a traffic jam, it still evokes that conscience of who is it or who am I that is there right now. We can talk about identity another time. That's a big topic, but that awareness is self-awareness. It's very simple. It's nothing big, like you have to go to the mountains and think I'm self-aware. Everyone is self-aware. It's the degree of self-awareness that you have to be. The moment you wake up, you're self-aware,
Right?
Because you realize you slept. Or even if you didn't sleep, you realize you haven't slept. That is self-awareness. So we need to simplify the whole thing about self-awareness, is that we are all self-aware, and otherwise we can't even breathe.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast, episode 8, Leading in the Remote Environment. Now, most companies had to switch to working completely remotely since COVID-19 hit the world. And unfortunately, some leaders are learning that remote work doesn't really work for them that great. And I just read an article not too long ago on LinkedIn where some of the leaders citing that projects take longer, collaboration is harder, and training new workers is becoming a struggle. And personally, I have worked in the remote and global environments for the last, I think 15 years. And I can see that there could be disadvantages in operating remotely when leaders aren't trained to manage teams with trust and consistency. And even for those companies that were offering a remote environment, I think it's becoming even more challenges because the new elements of remoteness are being surfaced. So when I used to work for the organizations like BT or YPO, even though we worked from home, but we still had opportunities to go to the events, meet with our customers in person. And now all this is poof, gone. We have to completely adjust to the new environment. So since you're also not a newbie to working remotely, talk to me about the challenges that you see leaders facing in your world.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of assumptions made about going from in-person to virtual live. And we've always talked about work-life balance. it's sort of shifted now towards work-life engagement. So how are we now engaging our work and life? Because there is no balance, simply because we are unable to have the luxury of having that boundaries that we used to set by going to a physical office or going to somewhere and then coming back to work. And even for, in our experience when we're working, or I'm still with YPO in terms of a remote location, we thought, we're so experienced in this, it's going to be a cinch. But what we are now starting to realize is that even working remotely, every quarter or every year or every so often, you still have that opportunity to meet your colleagues and engage with them and talk. That's where I think ideas or collaboration can never be replaced, because you're able to read the room, you're able to read the energy of people. There's something palatable when you're meeting someone. What remote does is there's dissonance, so incongruity in the way we engage each other. So I'm missing the environment, the sounds that adds to our engagement when we're meeting in person, the environment that we're in. Now it's a two-dimensional screen where, it's just a background and me talking like what we're doing right now. So there's a lot of external factors that either overloading our senses or on the other side, dulling our senses. So that motivation to work, that motivation to deliver may not be as intense as what it might have been where we might be meeting someone in person.
And you and I talked before we started recording this podcast that by nature, humans are social creatures, and what makes us social creatures is exactly what you're talking about, being able to be present in each other's energy. So I think for me, trust and consistency in communication is going to be key to successfully leading the remote team. I believe that it's imperative that a manager learns as much as possible about employees, especially now.
The interesting thing is what we're experiencing now and for the past few years has been what I like to call the crisis of trust. So with the emergence of fake news, the emergence of everyone can be their own broadcasters through social media, and you can say whatever you want out there, literally, it's taken us to a spot where, well, how do I trust people? And, when you talk about trust, it's an emotive thing. It's an emotion is driven by our senses. Now, when we start looking at that way, then, I trust someone because there is a certain alignment in values, and that is all about our senses as well. What we're now having to do on the remote thing is that there is no emotional support on this. And without the lacking of the emotional support, and what is the emotional support? It's like in an office, or when I know that even if we're working remotely, during one part of the year, I will certainly meet you or get to meet you. It does change the complete relationship in many ways. And so when we're now looking at the challenges of remote working, as a leader, how do I keep that authentic engagement on the screen, right? Because it can be taken quite easy in the wrong way, where it's just rhetorical talk. Right, just going through the process of how you're doing that as a leader. As a person in the team, how do I keep myself motivated? How do I keep myself engaged in the sense that I am pushing myself to the limit because there's no boundaries, and I think that there is no boundaries. Even if you have your own office or the luxury of having your own room for your work and you're able to close that off, it's still in the same complex. A lot of people saying to me, I just close my door and then that's it. And I'm just saying, it's still in the same complex. It's 2 feet away. And that, when you start thinking about it, it's like you can't get away. It's just a door. And the only time you close the door in the office is like you just want some quiet time to get your work done. So it's really flipped everything that for office natives, not instead of digital natives, it's a huge adjustment. You start having a flexible schedule, then there's no routine in your work habit.
Yeah, I think I've experienced kind of something very similar originally when I started working in the remote environment. You know, clearly self-care is important, but it's almost you forget that you need to set the boundaries.
Yeah.
And you know, realistically what happens, and I spoke last year to some of the students of my university where I've graduated from, and they were curious to know what it means to work in the remote environment, and the key is to make sure that not only that you have the space, but you also set certain boundaries.
The other thing is really to have a different thinking about what's happening now. And if we start looking at what a work environment was, it was a tribe. So we opted into a tribe, and that tribe accepted us. So we got employed. When we start working remotely, we're also part of a tribe, which is our family or the clan, right? So there's no separate, you're trying to please several clans or tribes at the same time. So it's pretty much like having all your in-laws together and your parents together at the same time. And you and your spouse will be there going, well, which set do I please? It's a no-win situation. And this is now scaled to a point where work at sometimes was an escape from home, and home was an escape for work. It was an excuse for each other. It was complementary. But now there is no excuse to get away because you can't. So what we need to start looking at is what infrastructure needs to go in. The second thing we have to look at is routine. So that routine has been disrupted now, where we need to start rethinking about what does it mean for me to intentionally start replanning, start rescheduling, and that becomes a habit. All this behavioral change has been put onto us remotely, and it has. What does that mean in terms of training? What does that mean, as you talked earlier, in coaching? What does that mean in authenticity? And what does that mean in being able to create the trust and create that emotional support on a 12:6 screen?
When we spoke, you told me that now more than ever, people in my profession are going to be needed. What I'm observing is actually those funds are being cut out. This is when the leaders who also feel quite alone because they're working in some cases in isolation. They need to meet the tough goals and make the decisions that sometimes the line manager or the direct manager of that leader can't help them with. Everything has been disrupted, everything.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you raised this. More than ever now, the role of a coach is so important because the emotional networking that happens within an organization is not there anymore. So for the top leader, he or she took for granted the networking support, the emotional networking support that happens within an organization. So from the C-suite, it goes down to the director's level, then they have the manager that reports in, they supervise the team. And there it is an emotional support. So there is the informal coaching that happens if you get a good boss that is able to help you think through the process. It's the thinking process. And as we've seen, diversity and inclusion in ideas and in employment and whatever is good for business because it broadens the perspective and then the opportunities for creativity and innovation to happen. That's without question, it is the benefit. Now, as we begin to work remotely, and we are beginning to work remotely, that emotional support or networking isn't there anymore. It's like a coach doesn't have any deliverable outcome as a supervisor or manager would have. And that objective guidance is so important, especially now in a remote situation.
This is our new business series called Next Steps for Success. And in this part 2, business transformation, we will discuss what international agencies or corporations, as well as serial entrepreneurs, are thinking about transformation and different approaches to running their businesses during the times of current pandemic situation. To just kind of get us kicked off, let me talk quickly about what I found recently, which is quite interesting. I wanted to mention the survey that was conducted in October by McKinsey, where they explored, and I'm quoting, how COVID-19 has pushed companies over the tipping point and transformed business forever. They found that the responses to the pandemic have speeded up the adoption of digital technology by several years. I believe they mentioned by up to 7 years, and that many of those changes could be here for a long haul. And so to stay competitive in this new business and economic environment requires new strategies and practices. And they're saying, again, this is all me quoting from those findings, they suggest that executives are taking note. Most respondents recognize technology's strategic importance as a critical component of the business. Not only the digital technologies are ramping up, but so are the fears of current workforce. HBR in September article noted, and I quote, fears of robot-induced unemployment are on the rise as tasks traditionally performed by humans are increasingly performed using robots and artificial intelligence. And the declining cost of machines threatens low-skill jobs and routine tasks. And just my comment, I don't think that's necessarily a new aspect, but it seems that those fears are intensifying. So what is your take on the changes that the companies are going to have to address to transform successfully?
Well, I mean, digitization, as the reports were saying, and what I'm seeing out there is just happening in much faster than anyone expected. And actually, we've seen in the past 8 months, the biggest migration to digital learning that everyone have ever seen. Digital learning meaning not learning about programming or coding, but digital learning of how to use certain applications more efficiently or effectively. With that being said, the other thing is the organization is being forced to do things that we really didn't want to plan on, because we liked going into the office. We've paid our lease out for several years. If I was a business, I might have had naming rights on the building as well. So obviously it's already a fixed overhead that it's part of the cost of business. So moving to that acceleration of being able to work anywhere and everywhere as you choose fit was something that was still kind of like, yeah, I think everyone still likes coming in, until the pandemic hit and everyone was forced to do that. We then realized that it is possible. So digitization is inevitable. The problem that comes up here is we don't have the infrastructure in place. And what I mean by that is, like, you can work from home, not denying that, but the infrastructure of the lines, how fast or speed your internet connection is, how many lines you might have, how many machines you might have that works at home that the family can use. So if you have a large family, the costs go a lot up because you need to put in more lines or bandwidth, and also you need more machines if family is learning and things like that. So there's a lot of extra costs that people are not thinking of. The bigger concern right now is cybersecurity, and not enough people are talking about that. You might be secure in your office. You might have enterprise security. That's also something that is not happening out there, surprisingly. But when you're back home, you might not have as stringent security measures as you might have within the company. And that's a backdoor for criminal activity to come into organizations.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast. This is our 13th episode, and today we want to talk about personal reinventing.
It's good to be back and great to reconnect. So today we're talking about reinvention, and it's something I'm going through right now. But when I started to reflect more on it, reinvention, you could also say it's recalibrating oneself, it's pivoting your direction, it's looking for change, or the other things that forces you to do something different, or to look for things that you don't have certainty about. And so it's a very interesting process that you go through. One, there is personal doubt. You also have that imposters
Syndrome.
That's right. Thank you. And it keeps churning with you in thinking, what do you do next when you have many opportunities before you or no opportunities before you? And that is the purpose of this podcast today, the meaning of reinvention and what to look out for.
I think a lot of people are being impacted right now. As you know, in my coaching profession, I work with people going through transition, and this is a very dear topic to my heart. I guess the question is, because of the fact that you now are going through reinvention and transition, what are the major challenges that you're seeing personally in your life that you have to experience and overcome?
Good question. I think for myself, that would be, do I still have it in me to start new? Do I still have the stamina because of how things may have moved on? Because after a while, if you work at a particular place for a while, the world does continue on and you're stuck in that process. But the good news is that first you need to review what you have done, right? Your immediate experience and then the previous experience. And, going through your LinkedIn profile and just looking at it, you see different things that emerges. And what I've done is actually focus on the positive of each section and relook at it, because each time you write your narrative, the last time you wrote a narrative for your LinkedIn profile may have been, for some people, several years ago, like myself. And when you look back at it, you're there going, wow, I've still moved on that narrative. And it allows you to recalibrate through that. So that's a very easy framework to start off from. The second part was obviously having conversations with you. I mean, one, you're not only a great friend and a bestie, but you're also a professional coach. So, not only do you put a brick in a pillow case and whack me around with it as much, it does give you that voice of reason that sometimes it's very easy for you to rationalize yourself out of it. We can rationalize ourselves out of everything, good or bad. So there are two things. One, review your experience, rewrite your LinkedIn profile, but at the same time, reach out to, if you have the opportunity, to professionals or friends that are able to give you, I wouldn't say well, yes, it is insight, but also to give you the sounding board that you need, at moments of transition, reinvention, or recalibration.
you brought up very important questions that might go uh, through your mind. Am I still relevant? Imposter syndrome and all of the elements that you've entered, but you're also dealing with grief. Even though you try to push that away, it's hard to basically say, okay, I'm good to go. For some people, it's easier to recalibrate and jump in and start developing the LinkedIn profile. But in reality is sometimes we just need to step away completely from anything professional and just take a little bit of time and take care of our mental health. That is definitely something that needs to be done, because if your mind is not settled on the fact that you are inherently valuable as an individual, because that's my belief that everybody is born with value as a human being. And I'm not talking about skills. Until you recognize that, then there's a possibility that the self-esteem, the imposter syndrome, as you were mentioning, all of this can interfere with the rational type of response where you can start building or making factually based assumptions of what it is that you are capable of, right? So before you reach that stage, you definitely want to take a little bit of time to basically get yourself to the point where you're rested, right? Even though it's difficult, but you got to go through those stages. So even though, I'm not discouraging somebody to go to LinkedIn and, connect with people, but I certainly say that if connecting with people at first is going to help you get to the point where your self-worth or self-esteem is restored, maybe start there first. I am glad that you and I have, this connection, but ultimately, if we think of our circle, people are not comfortable to reach out to former colleagues, to friends, and let them know that I really feel gutted. This is just bad. It's okay to do that.
And I'm really glad you raised that important point of taking the time to decompress and rest. Right. So we're in this overdrive mindset while we're working, and it takes a while for it to slow down. It's sort of like a pressure cooker. You don't, I don't know what everyone, a pressure cooker, for those people who don't know what it is, it cooks by pressure, anyway, you have to see it. And if you lift the whistle, it whistles when it's enough, right? If you lift the whistle, it'll go boom. And that's sort of like stopping all of a sudden. And it's, and taking time to decompress, to rest up, and just to allow yourself to give yourself some TLC, tender loving care, me time is so important. I'm so glad you caught that and reminded me of that, because I did do some of it, but not enough. And it is important to remember, coming from what you just said, is slow down. You don't have to do everything at once. As you are decompressing or in the process of reinvention or inventing oneself or recalibrating, they're listening to yourself, but you may not be listening to others. And that is because you keep listening to your inner voice, as some people say, and it becomes a point where you need to remind yourself is to stop and listen. Not stop and listen just to yourself, because you do start to like close down around you, but to stop and listen, because sometimes life is just wanting to be heard.
And I think it goes to, I'm not trying to simplify the whole idea of mindfulness. There could be that your mind full instead of mindful. Your mind is full with a lot of little liars called thoughts and emotions. They are liars. They are not allowing an individual to hear through the noise. It's that noise created, whether it's by grief or by the sense of loss, or maybe the sense of thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen in the future? We can't predict what happens in the future, but we can certainly take control of where we are in the moment, and potentially start building some type of strategy of what can we do, right? And so with this said, it just signifies the importance of taking the opportunity to slow down, listen to what you just said going on around you, and perhaps then be able to hear through the noise. And then from practical perspective, you could then look at your, let's say, resume, CV, or LinkedIn, and then say, okay, what type of skills do I already have to satisfy of what it is that I want instead? And that's when you start developing the focus, because unless you develop the focus in what it is that you went, or where you want to go next, I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10, you're going to be spinning, going in circles and creating extra anxiety. And then you're letting the job picking you versus you actually picking the job. So there are times where logically you can take a look and ask yourself, what is it? I think I've mentioned that to you before when we chatted offline. What is it that you want to be known for? What is that longer term desire, vision? And it doesn't have to be anything complicated, but I always encourage people, dream big. This is your opportunity. The universe is giving you an opportunity to slow down and actually dream big. You didn't have that when you were working and you were busy. You have it now. So I guess,
And
what is it that you want to do in the long term?
Hello, friends and family and coworkers and customers and all the wonderful humans in the world. Tim and I are always excited to do our podcast recording. As we were recording our next episode, there are some elements of introspection and meditation that we discussed in that episode. But Tim, could you give our viewers and our friends a bit of insight of what exactly needs to be done in the next few days?
Yeah, sure, Alex. In the next few days, see if you can spend time and create some headspace, like by meditation or spending just quiet time, especially in the coming 7 days, because we're entering a full moon space. So what does that mean? Okay, where does the word lunatic comes from? Lunar, moon. And if you think about when the moon is full, what happens? Tide goes up. And our body is made up of what? 70% water. So the moon has some impact on us, and you begin to notice as you grow older that around full moon, your emotions are also high because you're full of energy. So what meditation does, it settles you and allows you to see the situation as it really is.
I think it's a great advice to meditate anytime if this is working for you, but find a few minutes in your day to calm your emotions, because it's not only going to happen to the unhinged, it also could happen to you.
So Alex, I was thinking about the recap episode that we're doing. It's pretty much everything we've talked about. And, as we were, reminiscing over the 14 or 15 episodes we've done, we've very much shared our insights and our experience and our observations on how a person can take control or responsibility back of their lives. And in doing so, you're able to then create a vision or future that you really want, and start activating the goals that you've always talked about but really never actioned on.
Perfectly said. Perfect way to wrap up this episode and recap. Thank you so much, Tim. I'm forever grateful for all the lessons that I've taken away from you and learned how to evolve. Thank you so much, Tim. I look forward to our next episodes for many, many years to come, hopefully. And I appreciate you for being a wonderful, not only friend, but also professional business partner. If you enjoyed our discussion, please like and comment below. Subscribe to our channel, The Third Side of the Coin, to learn more about executive leadership and career coaching, mindfulness and meditation. Please comment, reach out to us either on the website, excaliburcoaching.com, or find us on LinkedIn.